Peach pies are the classic American summer pie. But why limit ourselves to peach season to satisfy this craving? Today I'm going to show you my recipe for making peach pie using frozen peaches. This is Adriana from Tasty Pastry Kitchen, and we'll walk through my entire process of making frozen peach pies, from rolling out the dough to filling it with the frozen peaches and baking it so you get that perfect crispy flaky pie crust. So the first thing that we're going to do is make the all butter pie crust, and you can do this with a pastry cutter, you can do this with your cold fingers, but I like to use a food processor because I think it cuts the butter into the dough more evenly. Okay, to the food processor, add your all-purpose flour, then your salt and your sugar, and a little bit of baking powder. And then let your food processor run for about 15 to 30 seconds. We're just trying to get a uniform mixture for our dry ingredients. Okay, then stop your food processor and add in about a third of your very cold butter and let this run for about another 10 to 15 seconds. This step uses a portion of the butter to coat the flour to inhibit gluten formation and give you a flaky crust. Okay, so open the food processor. Once you see no butter remaining, go ahead and dump in the rest of the butter. And here, you're only gonna pulse about 10 to 15 times. What we want is for the butter to be chopped into the flour, but we don't want it really any smaller than the size of a large pea. So count the pulses and then open the top. And then you can see I'm taking a fork to dig around and investigate the size of the butter. So don't use your fingers because I've done that before and you can cut yourself with a blade. But you can use a fork because this is safer. And I noticed that my butter chunks were a little bit too big. So I'm gonna pulse for about 2 to 3 more times and then reinvestigate. When it's all done, dump all of the pie dough into a large bowl, and we're gonna do the liquid portion with a large bowl and a spatula because it's much easier to assess the moisture level by doing it this way instead of in a food processor where you can easily overmix or add too much water. Okay, so you have your ice cold water and you have your apple cider vinegar. And what I like to do first is take a couple tablespoons of the ice cold water and mix it with the vinegar so that you don't get pockets of vinegar in the pie dough. Add that first to the dough and then use a spatula to press it into the flour. And then we'll start adding tablespoons of the ice cold water based on how moist the dough is. So the question is always at the end, how much water do you have to add to your pie dough? The reason why most recipes give you a range of liquid to add at the end instead of an exact quantitative amount is because there are a lot of factors that contribute to the pliability and the moisture level in a dough. There are environmental factors such as the air, and then if you were very precise when measuring out your flour. So I would say you should err on the side of getting your dough a little bit too wet because that's an easier problem to fix. When you're rolling out dough, you can always add more flour. However, if your dough is too dry, it's much more difficult to add water during the rolling process. And I think as you do this more, you're going to get more of a feel for the dough. So notice how I'm going down and kind of touching it and seeing how well it comes together. Once it gets to that point where you feel like you'd be comfortable with rolling it out on the counter, you can stop. And we are making a double crust peach pie, so we're gonna divide this dough into 2 equal portions. So go ahead and just pour the dough out onto 2 pieces of plastic wrap. So I have this thing that I do to increase the flakes in my pie dough. And what I do is I grab all 4 corners of the saran wrap towards the center, and then I use the heel of one hand and flatten the dough into one piece, and then open up the saran wrap and kind of fold the dough onto itself, kind of similar to how you would fold a letter into thirds. So I take one side and fold it towards the middle, and then take the other side and fold that towards the middle, and then I take the top and the bottom and do the same thing. And what I'm doing here is just creating extra layers in the dough so that you have a potential for extra flakes with your finished pie. Once I'm done with this little trick, then I shape the pie dough into a disc. And the reason that we do this is because it's much easier to roll into a circle when you have a disc. And then by smushing it into a disc, you actually have a larger surface area so it cools much quicker in the fridge. Okay, I do the same exact thing with the other dough, and then I take both of them and I stick them in the fridge for at least an hour. It's really great if you can do this the day before you're gonna make your pie, but I know sometimes life doesn't happen like that, so you can definitely just chill this in the fridge for an hour and still get a great pie. Okay, so let's move on to the filling, and I'm going to use these frozen peaches, which you can leave frozen. There's no need to thaw them. In fact, it's better if they're frozen, and the reason is because you can allow the crust to cook completely before the filling cooks and releases its juices. So you want that really crispy crust. You want to leave the filling frozen. As for my thickener, I'm using minute tapioca. This is my favorite kind of fruit pie thickener. Then you're going to add your sugar and then some salt. And then I like to give it a good toss in this mixture before I add some almond extract, which is a semi-controversial ingredient for peach pies, but personally, I really enjoy that flavor. It's not very strong, but you can leave it out if you don't like it. Then again, give it another good toss in this and set this aside while you roll out your dough. So to roll out this pie dough, I like to use a floured surface. For tart doughs, I typically use 2 pieces of saran wrap to roll it out, but pie dough is kind of a different beast. Do you see those little specks of butter all over the dough? That's the butter that's going to give us the flakiness for our finished pie, but if you try to roll it out using 2 pieces of saran wrap, it's going to stick. So the first stage for rolling out cold pie dough is to gradually warm it up just a little bit while increasing the diameter of the circle just a little bit each time you roll. So what you do is roll up and down and then flip while doing a quarter turn, roll up and down again, and then flip while doing a quarter turn, and keep doing this until it's about half the size that you want it to be. Notice also during this entire process that I'm continually having to reapply the flour. I think as long as you don't go overboard, it's not really going to impact the flakiness or the texture of your finished pie. My recipe actually uses less flour than regular recipes, and that's because I account for having to incorporate this flour during the rolling process. Okay, so keep doing this process over and over again, and soon enough you will get to a point where it's not really feasible, or you might actually break the dough by flipping it. And at that point, you don't have to flip it anymore, and all you have to do is use your pie pan to kind of gauge the size that you need. And once you reach a good size, all you have to do is use your rolling pin and fold the dough up over it, and use that to carry the dough over the pan. Then all you have to do is unroll the rolling pin on top of the pan, and you can kind of maneuver the pie dough so that it fits and drapes over the pan sides. So notice how the dough extends the edge of the pie pan. I did this on purpose, but the first thing that we're gonna do is kind of trim it so that it only extends just a little bit, but you do need it to be bigger than the pie pan. So I like to do this with a pair of scissors. You can do this with a knife if you're comfortable, and go ahead and trim the edges so that it extends past the edge, I would say about 1 centimeter, and that's gonna help us create a seal when we put the top layer on. So put that bottom portion in the fridge while you work the top layer. And it's the same thing. Take your dough out from the fridge, unwrap it, and sprinkle your surface with flour, and do the same exact thing that you did with the bottom, where you just roll out the dough up and down and flip and rotate and flip and rotate until you can't do that anymore. And then grab your cold pie plate from the fridge and use that to gauge the size. You're going to want 1 to 2 inches larger than the pie pan because the pie is kind of tall, so you want it to be able to cover the peaches. And then grab your frozen peaches and start piling it into the pie pan, making sure that you grab all of the sugar and the tapioca that might have collected in the bottom. It's not dissolved yet, so just make sure that you grab it all, because if you don't, your pie's not going to thicken up properly. And at this point it might seem like a lot of peaches, but just remember that peaches are very soft fruit, and when they cook they tend to lose a lot of their moisture and a lot of their structure, and so that'll cause the pie to kind of deflate. So I like to go in with my hands and kind of push the peaches in and kind of, you know, like a jigsaw puzzle, try to fit it all in, because you will need all of these peaches. And then take your butter that's been cut up into tiny little cubes and kind of scatter them all along the top of the peaches. All right, let's put the top of your pie on. This is where I like to kind of use a bench scraper to pull the pie dough up from the counter. Sometimes if your pie dough sticks, you can use this trick. Sometimes you don't need to, but just know that you have that if the pie dough gets kind of sticky. And then you use the rolling pin to put the top layer on. Now you're going to go around the entire perimeter of the pie and take the top layer and tuck it underneath the edge of the bottom layer. So you can just imagine this is like a huge peach dumpling or a huge dough pocket. And if you have, a seam on the edge that is open, essentially what's going to happen is all the juice is going to pour out of there from the inside of your pie, and then it's going to burn when the pie cooks. So you're going to want to make sure that this edge is completely sealed all around. And usually I go around a couple times just to make sure that everything is properly sealed. So the first time I go around is usually to trim and tuck and make sure that the top layer is underneath the bottom layer. And then the second time I go around is to put some sort of design, if I feel like it, around the edge of the pie. So that's what I'm just doing here with the edge of a wooden spatula. I'm just going around and kind of poking a little indentation around the edge, but this is totally optional. The one thing that is not optional, however, is to poke air vents in the pie. And this serves a couple of purposes. So the first is to release steam from the cooking. If you don't, then the pie will leak in places. So make sure that you have cut sufficient air holes. So you can use the knife method that I'm using here. You can use tines of a fork. You can use cookie cutters for larger cutouts. The second reason that you do this is because these holes, if you don't make a lattice pie, are really the window to the interior of the pie. So you can look through these holes to see how done your filling is, if the juices are bubbling, and if your peaches are cooked through. Okay, so I made these cutouts for my brother-in-law's birthday, and I will try to go over that in another tutorial, but essentially I just used pie scraps and some little cookie cutters, and then I'm gonna adhere them to the surface of the pie with a little bit of egg white. Make sure you freeze your assembled pie for at least 30 minutes before baking. Then prepare a baking pan with a sheet of foil on top of it. So very important, place your pie in the bottom rack of an oven that's been preheated to 425 degrees or on a baking stone that's been placed on the bottom rack. At about 25 minutes in, I noticed that my edge was starting to brown a lot quicker than the middle of the pie. This is totally normal, and all you have to do is remove the pie and make some foil collars to go around the pie. It's just kind of difficult because the pie is hot, but you just need to lay it loosely around the perimeter. So my pie took about 1 hour and 30 minutes to cook completely because the interior was frozen. If you find the exterior is browning faster than the interior is cooking, just take a sheet of foil like I did here and kind of make a helmet for the top of the pie. So you can see that the crust is really nice and brown, and I can see inside that the juices are really bubbling from the peaches. I got a little bit of spillage on the right, and that's totally to be expected with fruit pies and why we line our baking pans with foil. So let this rest for at least 3 hours before cutting into it. So here it is, the finished peach pie using frozen peaches. And because this was a birthday gift, I asked my brother-in-law to take a video of them cutting it. So here they are celebrating his birthday at home. Check out that flaky crust when they cut into it. And the peach filling is not runny at all. The frozen peaches have been cooked into these wonderful juicy peaches, and the minute tapioca has thickened up the filling and holds everything together perfectly, which is why it's my favorite thickener. The complete recipe will be up on my blog, Tasty Pastry Kitchen. Happy birthday, Alex, and I hope you guys have a great day.